I'm Beau Blyth, and I've been making freeware since 2008, and then I put out my first commercial game in 2015, which was Samurai Gun, and then I did the Combat and Hyperlight Drifter and Tormentor X Punisher. And now me and my team are hard at work with a big update to our game Samurai Gun 2, which is out now in early access on Steam. I want to talk to you today about how games are animation. Obviously, games are so much more.
But defining something for yourself and then exploring it deeply can be a very useful tool for your craft. If you believe games are music, games are stories, if you think games are art, these are all valid and important points of view, and I implore you to explore them and find what resonates with you and dive into it wholeheartedly. Because what you discover will help you hone the core principles of your style. But today we're going to talk about why games are animation. It's no secret tons of classic games are inspired by animated works of their era. If you dig into this, you will just start seeing everything pop out. One of our most beloved gaming mascots was originally supposed to be Popeye. Since Miyamoto was a big fan of the series growing up, it makes sense. So, we see games are animated. They have animation in them. And it makes sense that somebody animating a game would be inspired by animation as a medium. But let's take a step back for a moment. So I want to do a little thought experiment. I'd like you all to think about what animation is in abstract terms. So devoid of any experience, emotion, meaning, intent, or context. Very abstract. What are you witnessing when you see a movie? What senses of ours are being engaged? Now, I have two in mind. Maybe you have more than two. I want to know what you're watching, or maybe you have synesthesia and you can smell colors or something. But what comes to my mind is sight and hearing. That's a giant ear on a small head. So to engage in those senses, we need images in sequence and sound. And if we continue with that abstraction, what is a game but an animation with input, as we covered in Cass's talk? Now, input can be a whole talk in itself, but to keep it brief, I feel that the most important aspect of designing input is to provide responsive and distinct feedback. The reason I chose responsive instead of quick, so often people say like they want quick or instant stuff, but responsive, okay, I'll get into it later, sorry. All right, if you have too delayed or too subtle a response, people won't know that what you're making is interactive. And without different and unique kinds of feedback, people won't be able to understand the ways in which you're able to react. So how do we do this? How do we give players responsive and distinct feedback? Well, you may be familiar with the term game feel, or game juice. Game juice was popularized by Martin Jonassen and Petri Pirho in their talk, Juice It or Lose It. And in it, they go over many small enhancements that you can make to your game that make a big impact. Let's go over what some of those enhancements are. So you have color, tweening, intros, offsets, squash and stretch, impact flashes, camera shake, particles, motion trails, sound. Well, y'all, this is just principles of animation. If you put it together, what we're getting at here is essentially first principles of animation improve games. And it's no wonder, I mean, animation is making up a great deal of what a game is on the surface. So I think it's worth diving into. So let's start with images in sequence. To illustrate what an image in sequence can be, here's Henry Selick's Slow Bob in the Lower Dimensions, which is just the ultimate mixed media flex. I was going to find examples of all the different kinds of media in here. The Kraft cheese commercial in the previous talk, also perfect example of this. But look at that. We've got photos. We've got stop motion. We've got an actual set. Earlier we had drawings on cells. We had claymation. There's a lot going on. And then I also want to show you this music video by AC Boo next. They're an excellent studio. They always go really wild, have super hard style. That's awesome. The music is great too. So I just wanted to show you a variety of images to make a point, which is if you can make it an image, you can make it a game, which we also mentioned in Cass's talk. I think it's a very important point. I mean, this animation is such a strong influence on games that you have your whole animation style in some circumstances can just be your game. Like Cuphead did extremely well with its main hook being that's Fleischer. Like, I mean, I know people who like. I mean, okay, remember we mentioned Popeye earlier. Who knew Popeye would have such a lasting impact on games? Like we got Mario, we got Fleischer. Popeye's gonna come up again at some point. Yeah, look, do you even care what kind of game this is? It's beautiful. I know somebody who beat Cuphead, who does not typically play hardcore platform shooters or games in this genre at all. And they beat it. Have you beaten Cuphead? I can't even get past the second level. So of course, style is not just images, but it's also sound. I like to consider sound to be half of animation, because watching what sound can do to animation is nothing short of magic. Here's an example. So here we've got a square that's just teleporting from one location to another. But watch what happens when we add sound. See, hearing sound is like getting free in-betweens. I mean, your mind fills in so much of what's happening, but again, it's just teleporting. Another example I like. So here is just a blue line moving randomly across the screen. Add audio. And now that you hear rain, I mean, you can almost see the lines falling, right? Because you recognize the sound of rain, and your brain wants to interpret it as that, because you're familiar with that. All right, now let's focus on input. So, as stated before, good input requires responsive and distinct feedback. Now, there's one major difference between film and games because of this need for responsiveness, and that is frame rate, or frames per second. So film is usually 24 frames per second, unless you're making The Hobbit or whatever, whereas the baseline for games is typically 30 or 60, especially on console. But PC gaming is really challenging this with higher and higher refresh monitors. Right now, 144 FPS is more common, and new ungodly numbers that aren't divisible by 60 are coming out all the time. But anyway, what's with the hype of high frame rates? Why is this important? So this is mainly because the faster a computer responds to your input, the more you feel like you're in control. And seeing as though games is basically the art of agency, shrinking the gap between making a decision and seeing it appear is very satisfying. Anyway, so here's a little example I have. This movement is very arcadey. It's responsive, but when you're making something, you most likely want a feeling of momentum. It's this push and pull. It's or exciting. So often we go with an acceleration model for character control because we want that feeling. However, this interferes with instant feedback because our ability to detect small changes in speed can vary highly from person to person. So what do we do? How do we let our players know that their input wasn't dropped and that there's a different result between pressing the left key or the right key while still maintaining a feeling of momentum? Well, we can combine the two approaches. So here, now we have momentum and this tension and release feeling, but we also have instant visual feedback to support our sense of control. And we can push both of these sensations by layering feedback. Earlier, we talked about how sound is half of animation. So the more feedback, the better. And you'll often hear people talk about, so that's like definitely where like game feel comes in. Like you want to layer feedback. And something I'll often see is people just like juicing up their game for juice's sake. They'll just be like, oh, let's add squash and stretch here. Let's add screen shake here and stuff. And like something I want to stress, because often I'll see stuff like you'll collect a coin and then like the screen will shake, or like stuff will just be bouncing up and down uncontrollably. And it's like, it can be a bit much. I think something good to keep in mind is like when you're adding game feel or juice, you want to be communicating something. Like it has to be there for a reason. So you would shake the screen for a strong impact, or you would squish a character to like show that you've collided with something, and like to degrees as well. So it's like you can communicate how fast you're going or how much damage something did by like how you like how you make those effects like stronger or weaker. So it's like purely communication. So that's something to keep in mind. Anyway, we can agree that animation is important, right? Like what you're seeing here, other than like really superb game design, this is just a bunch of rectangles like overlapping in code, and like what the industry is praising much of the time is not so much like expertly crafted systems and solid, long-lasting code, but art style, graphics, animation, music, sound, because it stands out. I mean, this can be frustrating, but it's totally understandable. I mean, these elements make up a great deal of what players experience before they ever even play your game. So by now you can probably tell I'm very passionate about this aspect of games. And my team and I are very vocal about what we hold dear, and everyone's enthusiasm can be very infectious and inspiring. And so I'd like to encourage you to share with those you work with about your passions, and if you can, get everyone to care about animation. I think that'd be pretty great. But you know, if you can't, it's no big deal. But I'd like to tell you about one of my little hobbies, and that's like every now and then I see a game trailer on YouTube or something, and I'll notice something's like kind of off. I won't know exactly right away, so what I do is pause the video and then step through it frame by frame. And this can be kind of fun. So here's Hitman. In this scene, this man hits this car. That's not a smear, but we're populating the scene with another person and then going through the animation. And you might not think you would notice this, but once you see it and play it again, you really do see it. Because in the end, you know, it's animation. We're seeing these frames in sequence. We'll feel it. And this one, okay, there's so much going on here. All right, so here you'll see the bullets appear before the muzzle flash. The bullet at the top here will hit this worm and then slide off of his body and continue to go forward. Also, this guy here will hit the ground before they've hit the ground, like there. So there's this kind of hitch. So there's a lot of like little things that really affect how the game feels in the end. And I think if you can like you should talk to your programmers and like try to get this stuff to run in order, because it really will affect the way the game feels. All right, this one I didn't have to frame through. So here's a golf ball going on a loop-to-loop. From a gameplay point of view, I totally understand. Like, I'm like, hey, it works. I got a loop-to-loop to work in Unity. I wrangled it to make it happen. What more do you want? So I understand that. But from an animation point of view, this is like one really bumpy loop. Like, it's like going all over the place. And the ball trail there is just kind of highlighting it. If it didn't have a ball trail, you wouldn't feel this way. Anyway, I could do this all day. So in conclusion, recognize that the industry values animation principles, and share your passion with your colleagues, because everybody benefits from it. Thank you. So here, if you want to scan the screen or whatever, I compiled a bunch of resources, which are like YouTube channels I like that show instruction, and also the 2 videos I linked in my talk I put up there as well. So yeah, reach out if you have any more questions or want help with stuff. Yeah, thank you.